Good evening, everyone. How's everybody doing tonight? Glad to have you. Welcome to Empower You. We're so glad you're here. So I heard some scuttlebutt out in the front hallway that somebody, I think Jude, who does a great job checking everybody in, she was saying something about there was a little problem with a Russian boat. Did I hear that right? Sunk to the bottom of the sea. Big news. So just want to keep you involved with current events. So I am so glad you could come tonight to Empower You. The mission of Empower You is it's to help get you more empowered in your life by doing things like educating, helping you enjoy, have fun, and get engaged in important subjects like the Afghanistan war, like the state of our military. We're so glad we have our guest Stuart Scheller tonight. And I wanted to introduce you to the rest of the team. Since I forgot Barb Horwitz the other night, she's going to be the only person I introduced tonight. So Barb, let's give Barb a round of applause. I'll introduce everybody else some other time. No, we've got Leanne Cartier in the back on the board. Let's thank her. Our treasurer, Bill Roll. And Leah Cagle, who is going to be handling this event for us a week from Saturday. This is going to be a movie we're showing. Whose children are they? It's going to be a great Saturday morning wake up. I hope you can join us. It's going to be quite a movie. More about that and more about children in a minute. So just a couple of people I want to introduce, a couple of announcements. So my long-term friend Nick Knoll is here. He's in the back in the blue sweater. Say hi to him, everybody. And this is his book. It's called The War Against Black Americans in Freedom. And if you're interested in picking one up, you can see Nick at the end of the event. I also saw Christy Heeg here. Where are you, Christy? And she's in the back. And how many of you watched our class on corruption in the Republican Party? It was a very important class. If you didn't see it, you should watch the replay so you understand what's going on in the party. And people like Chrissy are stepping up to try to give new leadership to the party because it really needs it. And we're just glad you're running for District 8, which is the district that it goes by the Senate seat. We're in Senate District 8, and she'll be running against Marianne Christie. Is that correct? So let's give Christy a round of applause for stepping up. Tuesday's class with Annie Cyrus was absolutely incredible. To learn about how she was shared. She came from the Republic of Iran. At the age of 13, her father sold her. She was sexually abused. And to learn about kind of a different world, but an emerging world, was really something else. And if you want to watch that class, you can watch replays of all our classes on empoweryouamerica.org. And that class was really something. We've got 3 classes coming up I want to tell you about. Tuesday night's class is with Vivek Ramaswamy. And it should be just a great class. We did make a little mistake on our email that went out today. A couple of people reminded me of. Vivek's going to talk about 3 big hedge fund companies: BlackRock, it's BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, using your money kind of against you. And in the email, we said Blackwater instead of BlackRock. And I think Blackwater was an old Doobie Brothers song for those of you those of you that go back a little ways. So I know Vivek's excited about being here and talking about his new book that he's coming out with in just a couple months, and really just seeing y'all. So please sign up. We've got a few spots left in that class. Then a week from tonight, Dr. Ken Mangus will talk about forensic psychology and what happens with those difficult cases that they need help figuring out what happened. And then on Saturday next week, so we have 3 classes next week, we'll have the movie, Whose Children Are They? And it will really be great. So I had a couple people, we've got a couple required reading articles for you just to keep you in tune with what's going on. This is one that 2 people asked me to pass out. It's a great article from Imprimis, which is part of Hillsdale College. And it's Michael Rechtenwald, and he talks about the Great Reset. which is the class we're going to be having on April 28th. You should all take one of these articles with you. Bill Roll, our treasurer, will have them in the back when you leave. And then I also had a second article I felt like I should pass out to you because I've got a whole group of kind of whistleblower kind of people that send me stuff all the time and want me to know what's going on. And this one kind of blew me away. This is a two-sided piece of paper on the Ohio High School Athletic Association. So when my kids played tennis for Princeton High School, I figured the Ohio High School Athletic Association, when they had their meetings, you know, their summits, they'd probably be talking about things like, how to hire coaches, you know, what new equipment do we need to have this year? How do we keep the kids from cheating? Things like that. Well, I'm just going to kind of preview it. When you see what they're talking about now, when they have their meetings, they're only talking about one thing: race, diversity, and transgender stuff. This is really bad stuff. You should look at it and see what's going on really with sports across the state. You don't even know about it. Somebody sent it to me. It kind of blew me away. Bill will have this to hand out to you tonight. And finally, did any of you happen to see this article Sunday in the Cincinnati Enquirer? Title, Lawmakers Telling LGBTQ Kids They Are Not Worthy. I really felt like I needed to set the record straight if you're not on tap with what's going on with House Bill 616. House Bill 616 is so simple. You should read it if you get a chance. Basically, what it says is that you can't teach sex to kindergartners through third grade. That's what it says. You can't teach sex to kindergartners through third grade, and grades 4 through 12 has to be at an age acceptable curriculum. That's what it says. I've read the bill. Now, what the Enquirer says that it says is that, let me see if I can read this, is that that basically this will be easier for schools to bully and oppress lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and other people, and that it's really the worst thing that's ever happened. I was talking to a friend of mine about this bill, and we were talking about the concept of kids in kindergarten to third grade being taught gender identity and sex. And you know what? It's sick. It's sick stuff. And my friend, who I've worked on a lot of this education stuff with, she said to me, she said, "Do you remember what you were like in fourth grade?" You know, that's pretty disgusting too. It's pretty disgusting that they would be teaching our kids, trying to get them at fourth grade to try to understand what purple means. It's really something. We need people that kind of are out there that don't just let a narrative like this sick narrative kind of stand. It's really, really something. I hope you'll get engaged on that. Let's bring up our great executive director, Betty Overstreet. Would you give her a round of applause? We're gonna do a few giveaways.
You. I want to talk about our giveaways real quick before we give them away. Stuart Scheller found himself without a job all of a sudden, but he hasn't wasted any time because he's got a website where he sells stuff now. One of the things we have here to give away in the audience tonight is a tumbler that says, "United we stand, silent we fall." And the other one that we're giving away online is a stainless steel drinking, and it says American made on it. He's got some really cool stuff on his website. You ought to check it out. I actually bought one of your shirts too. But the shirt that I got has a picture of the American flag, and it's got his little logo with the S's on it. But what I really like is the wording that's on there. It says, I forgot what I was going to say. It's "We the people can't all be wrong." I thought that was really neat. So we're ready to give away.
The first one's for the tumbler, and that will be number 144. Who's got number 144? Oh my goodness, 3-time winner, David. No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Here you go.
We'll begrudgingly clap for him. Okay, let's go. Come on. Just since we knew that he might rig the whole thing, we actually have a backup gift too. This is kind of a fun gift. Hopefully you've got some kids. It's a egg decorating kit for Easter. Have a little fun. This is not on Stuart's website. And that is how about number 156? 156. Your name? Let's give. Thank you. Congratulations.
And for our online water bottle, we have Susan M. And Susan, we will be sending that out to you in the mail. I've had quite a few people ask me, how did you get Stuart Scheller here? Well, long story short, I just asked. Actually, I have to give the credit to his mom. I knew he was from Cincinnati. That's really all I knew. I didn't know anything else. So I did know that he put his video on Facebook. So I knew he had to have a Facebook account. I didn't think he would ever see anything I put on there. So I kind of went looking around for a relative and found his mother. I sent her a message and she answered me the same day that night. I was just shocked that she would see that and get back to me so quick. And she said, I'll forward this to him. That's all I can do. And I heard from him the next day and got him scheduled that day. And I don't think I have ever had a speaker that I got booked that quickly, especially when I didn't have a lead in somewhere. So I just want to thank you for being so accommodating and being willing to come back to Cincinnati, your hometown, and speak for us. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. Stuart joined the military in 2005. In 2006, the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit he was part of was caught up in the Israeli-Lebanese conflict. His unit secured the embassy and conducted an evacuation of American citizens to Cyprus. His second deployment with this unit from September 2007 to April 2008 was Ramadi, Iraq. His friend David Borden got hit with a suicide vest on this deployment. This was the same unit that was hit in Afghanistan. He served in, and I probably will say this wrong, but he served in Patika East, Ghazni Province in Andar District as a CIED expert for the Army infantry units and did all the patrols with EOD, I think that's explosive disposal, and route clearance platoon. During his career, he has been deployed to various other areas, not all of them being in combat zones. He has a Bachelor's of Science degree focused on accounting and a Master's in Military Science focused in foreign diplomacy. He has been a CIED team leader in Afghanistan, executive officer, Alpha Company, platoon commander, basic school instructor, operations officer, Echo Company commander, and warfighting director. These are just a few of the leadership roles he's had. He has been awarded the Bronze Star, Army Commendation with Valor, 3-time Meritorious Service Medals, 3-time Navy Commendations, Combat Action Ribbon, Iraq Campaign Medal, Afghanistan Campaign Medal, and 2-time Humanitarian Service Medal. Stuart had risen in rank to Lieutenant Colonel and had a 17-year career with the military when he posted a video to Facebook and LinkedIn asking for accountability from military and political leaders on the Afghan withdrawal. Until the video, he was serving America in the military. Now he is serving America as a citizen. Please welcome Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller.
Can you hear me now? All right. Yeah, so when Betty asked me, sorry, I'll get this, I promise. So when Betty asked me, Cincinnati is my hometown. I went to Anderson High School, University of Cincinnati, and just over the timeline, this worked out. So I had planned on telling you a little bit about myself, but I think that introduction was more than what you needed. So yeah, I've commanded at every level, platoon commander, company commander, battalion commander. And this was something that was very personal to me. So sitting in my office as a battalion commander, I watched the Afghanistan evacuation play out. And in our current information environment, we all have access to information that even our senior leaders have, right? And so there was a long list of decisions that were made that to me were pretty clearly poor decisions. And I just got to a point where I felt like somebody needed to say something. And she said it, but just to double down on it, I have a master's in military science. I wrote my master's thesis on how to make foreign diplomacy more effective. I've been to all these places. I know all these people. I was the regimental opso that put these units out on deployment. I mean, that unit was my first unit. There was no one that was more tied to all these little links than me. And so after I posted that video, I didn't do it lightly. I articulated in the video that I knew I was risking my job, my retirement, my family's stability, but I did it anyway. So I articulated that to illustrate that I had thought through that. I was fired immediately the next day without an investigation. I felt like I was being bullied a little bit. I felt like former bosses were coming at me and no one was addressing the content of what I was trying to say. No one was addressing the content of my statements. So it became this quickly escalating series of events where I continued making statements because I felt very strongly about what I was saying. And so I got fired, I got bullied, I made another statement, and then there was a narrative that was pushed out that I was crazy, that I was suicidal, was forced to get a mental health evaluation, which further angered me. I didn't have to get a mental health evaluation when I missed the birth of my first child. I didn't have to get a mental health evaluation after I killed people, after I came back from combat deployments. The only time I was ordered to get a mental health evaluation was when I questioned my senior leaders. So I went in there, I got that, I came out, and now it's like, now there's a fight. So I told him I was going to resign. And I said, here's my paperwork. And we just continued to go back and forth. I continued to release statements, updating people on what was happening to me. And they eventually gave me a gag order. I broke the gag order to make another post, and they sent me to jail for it. So I was in solitary confinement for 9 days. I got out, was court-martialed, and then after the court-martial, put in the resignation and exited the Marine Corps. So it was a challenging time, and you also have to understand the timeline of it. So that didn't happen quickly. That was from August to Christmas Eve. And when I was going through all of that, I couldn't make statements without legal ramifications. And so there's a lot of narratives that were run about me, whether it was about politics. For me, this was very apolitical. Accountability of our senior military political leaders should be something that all Americans expect and demand. But I couldn't really address that. People were saying it was about politics, money. I got called a fascist, like I compared to Hitler. I mean, it was crazy. I couldn't address any of these things. So when I got out on Christmas Eve, my goal was to go into the media. And I did. I hit a lot of big shows between January and February. And the purpose for that for me was just to go around and tell my side of the story. Hey, I love America. I'm a conservative. I believe in the Constitution. But everyone's saying that I broke my oath. I feel like I upheld my oath more than all my peers that stayed silent to protect their jobs and their security when there's clear things that are wrong with the system that's going on, right? So I did that for 2 months. And then in March, I focused on writing a book. So I finished the book. It's gone through 2 revisions. They brought my website. You can pre-order the book through my website, AuthenticAmericans.com, or you can get it on Amazon. It'll come out September 9th. It'll be in all the stores, the Books of Millions, Barnes & Noble. But I focused on all that for March. Why that's relevant? I had always planned on doing speaking tours. So when Betty asked me and I looked at my calendar and I was like, April, be done with the book. I had planned all this out. So a couple months of media, do the book. And then I was planning on just kind of dropping off the radar. But Cincinnati got to come home. It made a lot of sense. But why that's relevant? So I'm going to go build a speaking platform and go talk, but I'm very raw in this. So I've developed like a draft of what I want to say in my speaking tour. So you guys are kind of getting like the first unfiltered version. So I don't know, maybe that'll be the good one. I don't know. It'd be fun to compare what I'm about to do to, you watch me speak in 9 months, but in going through this, I realized like people make a career off of this, doing speaking engagements, and there's speaking bureaus. There's actually careers for doing TED Talks. So you can find coaches. All the big TED talkers have professional coaches that give them a formula. And it starts with like a big idea followed by 3 key points. And again, like I said, I'm very raw in this. So if I was to have a big idea, and it's really how I structured my book too, is they'll start with like a hard fact. The hard fact is the United States military hasn't won a war since World War II, period. And so you can have an academic debate, and I'll open up for questions. You can have an academic debate about Korea and the stalemate there. You can have an academic debate about Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I would submit we were back in Iraq in another 10 years. I would submit to you Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, decade-long wars. You could go through a bunch of smaller operations, whether it's Beirut, Kosovo, Somalia. I mean, Somalia, before I joined the military, I watched Black Hawk Down over and over because I thought that was what American idealism was, running through the streets with a gun. And then you read about the operational failures that our generals and our politicians made to put them in those places. And it's criminal, quite honestly. You look at Libya, the mistakes that were made in Libya. You look at the mistakes that were made in Syria. I mean, the list goes on and on. And it starts, and I'm writing about this and I'm thinking about this and I'm starting to get frustrated. And so then, like, again, after this, we'll do a deep question and answer, and I can go in a great, I've thought about this. Like, yeah, thank you. I can go deep on any conflict if you'd like to, but let's just start there. If you assume that that's true, right? So then my question that I've been trying to solve in my head, and I'm going to kind of work out through the speaking tour, is can America still have an influence on the global stage if senior leaders aren't acknowledging obvious failures? And there are obvious failures, and the Afghanistan evacuation to me was the punctuation mark on these thoughts that I've been having over a 17-year career. So let's just talk about the Afghanistan evacuation. 1 second. So the Afghanistan evacuation, President Biden in April, he ordered 2,500 troops down to 650. And you have to understand, most American people don't understand how the generals work. So I can talk to you about combatant commands after this. Most people understand the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, but in post Goldwater Nichols, we divided the globe up into 7 theaters. And there is a 4-star general in charge of each one of those theaters. And so the CENTCOM Combatant Command, where General McKenzie is, he doesn't work for General Milley. He works directly for the Secretary of Defense and the President. So President Biden looks at General McKenzie, the CENTCOM Combatant Commander, in April and says, I want you to go from 2,500 troops down to 650. General McKenzie later says, I told President Biden it was a bad idea. He knew it was a bad idea, but he does it anyway. And he states, I did it because I was following the orders that I was given. So he draws down from 2,500 to 650 from April to July. 2,500 to 650 and in the peak fighting season. That was the point I was trying to digging it out of there. If you've been to Afghanistan, you know that the Taliban goes into the mountains and hides in the winter from November to April. Very cold, no fighting. Every general, every military member who's been over there knows that. So what we do is we plan to draw down military troops during the peak fighting season. Why did we do that? Because September 11th was a symbolic date. So we put people's lives at risk. We put American citizens at risk because of this nothing mark on the calendar, when tactically everybody knew it made sense to just wait 6 months. You'll be completely unmolested by the Taliban, but we don't do that. So General McKenzie, he can't convince the president. He goes with the flow, he follows orders. He draws down troops from 2,500 down to 650. And then he evacuates Bagram Air Base, which it's hard to even fathom, not having been there, how key this piece of terrain was. And President Trump's plan, when he created it for Afghanistan, the final thing that we did was leave Bagram Air Base, because you could have completed the whole evacuation unmolested in Bagram Air Base. You would have never seen Afghanis running on an airfield, chasing an airplane in Bagram Air Base. Just wouldn't have happened. So when General McKenzie knew the evacuation was coming in April, when he started drawing down the troops, he assigned General Farrell Sullivan, guy I know personally, is a one-star, also a Marine officer, and he said, I want you to plan the evacuation while we're drawing down military troops. General Farrell Sullivan, from April to June, plans on using Bagram Air Base. And then unexpectedly in June, General McKenzie says, no, I've changed my mind. 650 troops is not enough to hold Bagram, Kabul Air Base, and the embassy. So scratch Bagram. And he states that later in his congressional testimony, but he never addresses because the members of Congress, quite honestly, aren't, in my opinion, experienced enough to ask these deeper questions is, why did you wait from April to June to make that decision? Your planners lost 3 months based on your indecision. And so then when he made the decision in June, a month later, they leave Bagram Air Base. In that base, they left 7,000 prisoners in the prison. They didn't tell the Afghan National Security Force that they were leaving. So imagine you're a prisoner, you're getting 3 meals a day from American prison guards, and then one day your food just doesn't show up. And then 2 weeks later, the Taliban walks in unmolested, releases 7,000 prisoners who hated the United States before, but I mean, talk about where they're at now. The suicide bomber that later attacks us, we'll never know for sure. There's a high probability he came from that prison. Then the Taliban continues up to Kabul. They surround Kabul. At this point, way late, General McKenzie decides, all right, this is a problem. We need to throw 5,000 troops at it. So he, 2,500 down to 650, throws 5,000 at Kabul. Taliban has already surrounded the city. He is forced to rely on the Taliban for external security. Of course, the Taliban allows the suicide bomber through their checkpoint, kills 13 service members, 100 other people standing there. Then in response to that, we fly a drone strike to kill whoever was responsible. We kill nothing but civilians and children. And then after that, the president, the secretary of defense, and General McKenzie stand up and talk about what an overwhelming success the evacuation was. And I'm like, it's infuriating. It's infuriating. There is no way the system is going to evolve. Like, there is not a better example in military history of just complete failure. And so, you know, it's funny, people online probably can't see it. There's a huge picture of the World War II front. I'm sitting here getting ready to come speak, and I was talking about, like, we haven't won a war since World War II. And I'm sitting here, in World War II, generals were fired at the rapid rate. Sometime after World War II, we just got away from that. So how do we get better if we can't acknowledge obvious failures? So I could give you, my book goes through 15, 20 points. What I demanded in my video was accountability. Accountability doesn't change the system, it causes a course correction. It doesn't address why you failed, it just holds you accountable for failure, right? So at a bare minimum, we need accountability, but it doesn't necessarily fix the problem before it happens. And so my book basically outlines why the culture has gone off course, and then why it's important for Americans to care about this. So I'll start with why Americans should care, and then I'll get into why I think the military is so fundamentally broken. But from my standpoint, there's lots of models for national power. The simplest one is called DIME: diplomacy, information, military, and economic. Right? So when you go wage war, it's always to accomplish a political objective. So let's just use Russia right now, right? What options does President Biden have? So he is using the economic, go through DIME, diplomacy, information, and economic sanctions. That's what they are. And then he has the other choice of using the military option to compel the enemy to do what he wants them to do. That's what the military should do. Hey, other country, I want you to do this. You're not doing that. I'm going to use my sources of power. You're still not doing it. Maybe I'm going to commit military violence to go do that. When a politician outlines objectives, the military general, in my opinion, should be held accountable for achieving those. And up to this date, we haven't. So why? I've got 3 points. Like I said, in my book, there's a lot more, and I could talk to you all day about this. There's also like my personal story. So I went through a lot. I kind of opened with that. I'm not going to go into all of that, but in the question and answer, that's really the meat and potatoes of this. Like, I can talk to you about what it was like to be in jail as a lieutenant colonel. I can talk to you about how this has impacted my family. I can talk to you about all of that. But all that will come out, I think, in the question and answer. So I hope as you're kind of listening to me, we all develop some questions. All right, so the number one problem with the military, bar none, is that they've lost their warfighting focus. And it is indicative of how they promote. All right, so a commander at any level, if I'm a platoon commander, company commander, battalion commander, and these 4 individuals are my subordinates. So if I'm a company commander, they're my 4 platoon commanders. In every branch of service, if I'm a Marine infantry officer, these 4 should demonstrate that they're the superior warfighter somehow, whether that's through some warfighting competition, however I define they can demonstrate warfighting. But what happens is I just evaluate you and I rank you 1, 2, 3, 4. And I do this based on my own subjective assessment as a commander. And so what has happened is everyone's figured this out. So now instead of a singular focus on warfighting, it's a singular focus on, I gotta make my boss happy. And when you become singularly focused on pleasing your boss, over time, this thing starts drifting pretty quickly. And you can just trace it all the way up to our senior leaders at political leadership levels. What's important to our politicians, you know, we've been trained to just please our boss all the way up to the end. Further, when you have senior generals, when you look at General McKenzie, I was following the orders I was given. Look at General Ham in the Benghazi incident. Americans on the TV screens fighting 1 versus 1,000. Stu Scheller's the combatant commander for AFRICOM. Somebody calls and says, no, stand down. And I've got multiple options. The moral thing to do is to go save American lives and you deal with the ramifications later. You don't stand behind, I was following orders. That's not good enough, General. It's not good enough anymore. But they get to these positions because over 40 years, he's tried to impress me to be the #1 report. And he doesn't get there if he pushes back. If he comes up and tells his boss at any point along 40 years, sir, you're not right. You got it wrong. What you said to the guys out there, that was wrong. All right, you're my #3, right? There is no qualitative, objective evaluation. And so by the time they get to 40-year generals, they've been conditioned not to push back. And we have lost the moral courage that we had of the gentlemen that were fighting in this war. So war fighting, and I could go into a ton of other ways that you can improve that, but that's probably the #1 problem is war fighting is just not really the focus. And you hear it a lot, woke generals. Well, what does woke mean? You know, I'm a conservative, but if I asked you what woke means and you what woke means and you what woke means, we all have different impressions. I could give you my definition of it, but what people are really saying when they say woke is that our senior generals are replicating what politicians want at the time. And when Democrats are in power, that's wokeism. But really they're misdiagnosing the problem. What it is senior general officers are just pleasing whoever's in charge. And when they do that, and when you have a liberal establishment that's in charge, that's what you get. It's a systemic problem. It's not an individual problem. And so you can not like the current people that are in there as much as you want, but until you fix the system, that thing is going to keep happening. All right, so warfighting focus. #2 is just people, talent. So a lot of people don't realize this until they're actually in it, but in any other organization, you're not going to be able to keep your best talent, right? You're going to lose talent. Some of your best talent is going to go to other companies. But in the corporate world, you can hire talent from other places and you can cross-pollinate. In the military, you can't. You literally have to home grow them from 0 to 40 years. And it's strictly time-based for promotion. So if I just get selected to captain, I know even if I'm better than every other captain in this room, I have to wait 5 years before I'm eligible to look at major. There's no get in the warfighting simulator, fight the next guy, whoever wins gets promoted to major, or whatever it is. Come up with whatever the process is. I'm kind of spitballing here, but there's no way to objectively show who's better. It's strictly time-based, and then you pull out the reports, subjective evaluation from your boss, every branch. And so what happens is the real talented people that are sitting there and saying, I could do this for 30 years just trying to please my boss, or I could go out in the corporate world. I'm a pretty talented guy. I know I'm talented at this guy, but I don't get any preferential treatment over him. We're both going to just sit here in the queue until we're eligible. So why wouldn't I go somewhere else and get paid all the money that I deserve? And so what happens is the military bleeds off actually a lot of its elite talent, and they can't cross-pollinate. They can't bring in other people because they homegrown from nothing. And so what you're left with are the people that kind of sit there and withstand and are resilient enough to just wait in the queue from 0 to 40 years. In the current military, Alexander the Great would never serve. Elon Musk can never be a general in the military. It has to be an old man or woman that has just withstood 40 years. It's the only system that we have. It's crazy, quite honestly, and it's depressing. And then the third one, fixing the military. There's so many different directions I could go with, trying to keep it to 3 points. But I think the legislation, if you're familiar with how the military and the foreign diplomacy establishment was working, I'll just get a little history on it. So in the founding documents, this is why we don't have accountability of senior military leaders. In the founding documents of our founding fathers, they created a federal military for domestic defense. They never envisioned America to be this forward projecting of military power as it is today. Following World War I, Woodrow Wilson had a 14-point speech where he outlined America has a moral obligation to go help countries that are in need. That kind of set the tone for, hey, we went and helped in Bella Wood. We did some things in World War I. We need to start involving ourselves. America's got power. We need to start involving ourselves. World War II happens. Japanese bomb us. Immediately after World War II, we create National Security Act of 44, 47, 50, and we create Secretary of Defense. None of that stuff existed before World War II. We built it all. Then we went to Vietnam. We had failure, a lot of failure in Vietnam. And so after Vietnam, we passed the Goldwater Nichols Act. And what that did was create the combatant commands that I was just describing, which actually further increased the power of the 4-star general in a lot of ways. But think about it. Who's holding the senior general accountable for failure in war? The president, like Biden. I just went through that list. I mean, that's objectively, apolitically, like you failed, right? Hopefully people can look at this in time and take the emotion out of it and say, that was bad. You did that badly. But he's not going to fire General McKenzie because to do so would reflect on his own failures as commander-in-chief. The only time a president's going to fail or fire a general is when like a McChrystal gets in the Rolling Stone magazine, talks bad about Obama, right? Like if you talk bad, if you're unethical, then it's easy to fire you. But what's the last general that's been fired for the war-fighting capability the military branch is designed to do? I couldn't think of an example. Congress controls the DoD budget. Man, I sat there and watched them apolitically, both sides of the aisle, with their sound bites of anger, how it was messed up in the Afghanistan evacuation. It was popular to be mad at the generals. And then what happened? Nothing. And I'll tell you what wasn't in the media, concurrently, like literally at the same time they had those congressional hearings, Congress passed the largest DoD budget ever. The one lever of control that Congress has over the DoD is the budget. Any one of those representatives could have said, hey, you want $745 billion? That's a lot of the taxpayers' money. Well, this is a huge list of figures that we all just agreed on. Well, give me somebody that's accountable. I'm going to just take 20% off the top. Problem solved. But to do that would go against self-preservation. It could be spun in a narrative as almost anti-military. The Chinese are coming. The Russians are coming. You're trying to cut the budget. You need to vote him out. It would require courage that currently our congressional leaders don't have. So then I go back to the president's not going to fire him. Congress doesn't have the courage to use the budget as a tool. The founding documents don't have anything about holding senior military leaders accountable. The Goldwater Nichols Act created these very powerful 4-star generals. The general officers aren't holding themselves accountable. Like, who holds them accountable? And it came down to like a lieutenant colonel sitting in his office making a video and posting it to Facebook and YouTube. Wasn't as effective as I hoped. But it did start a conversation, right? And so where I'm getting to is, I think right now the American people need to start understanding these problems, because if we don't, and the military and that DIME acronym, going back to that, if we continue to use our military and don't accomplish the objectives the politicians set forth, obviously we fail those objectives. But what we're also doing is degrading the economic, diplomatic, and information sources of power at accelerated rates. And so if I could implore you to action, it would be the American people need to understand these problems, because it's directly going to impact you. The more our national power degrades, the more other people get a voice in how the global system works, and the less of a vote that we get. And the way the American people can control that, in my opinion, other than voting for the president is very important for all the reasons we're talking about, but also talking to your representative, whoever he or she may be, and telling them, hey, the DoD budget, why did you approve it when nobody was held accountable? The only person that was held accountable in the Afghanistan evacuation was a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps, and he got held accountable for asking for accountability. Like, the irony there is pretty sickening, to be quite honest with you. Yeah, that's my pitch. It was not, it's 45 minutes, but hopefully the question and answer, we can go on for a while. So I'll turn it over to you all.
Who's got a question? Who wants to start it off?
Here we go.
Yes. You, of course, are known for speaking out about Afghanistan, and you are talking about the problems in general. And you had mentioned Libya, Syria, Iraq. Is your book going to cover some specific examples of failure in those other conflicts, or is it only going to be Afghanistan?
Yep. So I don't, in my book is structured in two parts. And so it's, what I didn't get into here was my personal story. So half the book is literally my personal story, and the other half of the book is my career that talks about the macro trends of my generation over the last 20 years. Now, I couldn't not, double negative, I inserted some historical examples. There's some stuff about Verdun, World War I in there, and the parallels. When you look at World War I, when I really started reflecting on it, the World War I started with Germany and the Schlieffen Plan, like an attack through Russia and France simultaneously. Really, they're trying to beat France and then deal with Russia. And you listen to military historians, all they talk about are all the reasons it failed, and it had to do with like train capability, and the plan evolved, and Russia mobilized faster. You know why that plan failed? Because they were stupid enough to have a plan to go against two fronts, right? And that it seems so painfully obvious, but when we're in military universities, we assume the geopolitical things are out of our control, and we start with all these small details. And so the parallel that I'm going to is in Afghanistan, we started a war on two fronts. And we had the ability to win Afghanistan right in the beginning. And I go into this too. There was something called Task Force 58 that was inserted in the very beginning. It had the ability to go in and surround the Tora Bora region and kill Osama bin Laden. And we pulled back because Rumsfeld wanted to use special forces. It was a terrible call. And then we decided to start a war on the second front. And then once the war evolved, we didn't change the thinking of the military commanders. Same thing with the Germans. The Germans in Verdun, their one goal, was to kill the enemy. But the strategic plan had changed such that they should have just attrited him and not been so reckless. But the subordinate commanders didn't understand that. And I saw that play out on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Subordinate commanders wanted to be super aggressive and kill the enemy, but the plan had changed. So I don't know, it was like a long-winded way to answer your question. Half the book is my personal story. Half the book is talking about my career and some of the social agendas and the really, when I talked about in the beginning, how you fix the culture. But I make some historical reference, but to answer it succinctly, I don't go into all those conflicts.
Question right here. Question right here.
My name is Rick.
Hey, Rick.
Do you characterize the upper echelons of the military as political hacks, and what implications on morale does that have for the average soldier?
Yeah. I think all military officers went in for idealistic reasons at one point, and I do think that they're all intelligent people, but it goes back to the problem I was describing earlier. They're so conditioned to pleasing their bosses that they absolutely are trying to please politicians. When you get to the three stars have to be appointed by Congress. So 3 and 4 stars are very cognizant of the political landscape and what the political agendas are, and they cater to that 100%. Now, are you ever going to eradicate that? You're not. I mean, in our system, if the military works for Congress, that's going to be part of it. But there needs to marginalize the problem you're describing. There has to be objective metrics. So even if you don't like someone, but he's the better guy, or the better girl, they're still getting the job. And it's not just based on them liking you or you pledging to support certain initiatives that are popular at the time.
Stuart, when you made your first post, who was the first upper person you heard from and what did they say to you?
When I first made the post, the only people that reached out to me were friends and family. And I mean, lots of friends, lots of Marines, subordinate Marines, mostly tell me either they agreed with me or they agreed with me, but they thought I should take down the video. But I didn't talk to my command until the following day. So I went in, spoke to my CO, and then he shortly after that fired me. But no general officer called me or asked if I was okay.
We have a question over here.
Yeah, in my studies of Islam, it looks to me, you said you could have won that war. Could you ever change the culture so they would have an elected democratic government in Afghanistan or any other Muslim country?
Yeah, so that's a deep question. So what is winning war? Winning war is achieving the political objectives. The initial political objective for Afghanistan was destroying the safe haven for the terrorists that conducted the attack after September 11th. And then it morphed into the Taliban was the terrorist. But quite honestly, a terrorist by definition is a non-state actor. The Taliban was not a non-state actor. We created a non-state actor by pushing the Taliban out of Afghanistan, but they were a conventional force through and through from start to beginning. So I was actually very confused as to what the political objectives were. And they turned into kind of what you're addressing. Can you have a central government that is democratically elected? And quite honestly, this is my opinion now. My opinion is that's not for America's decision. That's their decision on what we want is stability in the global region. So they determine their form of government. Now there's some humanitarian and moral implications with some of those governments that we have to be cognizant of. But no, I don't think there are some places where more of an authoritarian government would probably be more effective if you're looking at it from a stability standpoint.
I didn't mean just Afghanistan.
Yeah, I get you.
I meant Muslim countries in general, because it looks to me like they are all dictatorships.
Yeah, I mean, there's some, without going through all the examples, there's definitely some Muslim countries that are very democratic. Jordan has a king, but if you go, I've spent a lot of time in Jordan. They have definitely some democratic processes. But yeah, I guess you're right, holistically, but I wouldn't say that that's a overarching rule, but yes, there's some truth to what you're saying.
Here's a question right here.
Hi, my name is
Hi.
Chrissy.
Hi, Chrissy.
I want to thank you for what you've done because genuinely I watched it as it was live and I completely agree with everything that you said in that video that night. I wonder if with the way that geopolitical is heading now, with everything that's going on, is there enough in the military that have the same type of conscience and integrity that you have to where they would have the courage to stand up from the ground up to the upper levels to where we would have enough people to stand up for what's right.
Yeah.
And defend a constitution.
I think that my dad and I were having this conversation on the way over here. I think there's always been large bureaucracies that have controlled the narrative. I think the difference now is American people are getting smart enough and they have more access to information and they can see immediately when people in charge are telling half-truths, are lying, are being smug, hypocritical. And that's just, look, World War II, a day that lives in infamy. Maybe it was a day where the Navy was completely unprepared, right? I mean, imagine if we had all the access to information just from that, right? So the narratives have always been there. What's different about today is we've stopped trusting a lot of the media. We're starting to question and we have access. I mean, when I was writing my book, I mean, just like doing research on Verdun, I mean, there's like 20 YouTube videos I can watch. Like the amount of information that's out there, it's pretty amazing, quite honestly. So your question though was if there was like a moral thing, would the military completely stand up? And I guess it depends on what it is. I mean, the COVID thing, despite what your take on it is, there's so much information out there. But at a bare minimum, guys and gals that have served for the last 20 years, over 2 decades, if they decide based on all the information out there that they don't want to get vaccinated, for them to not get an honorable discharge, which is what is happening now, they're all getting less than honorable, some of them even dishonorable. I mean, that's criminal. And so if there was ever one ethical thing where everyone, like even the guys that are vaccinated should be saying, okay, if he doesn't want to get vaccinated, he can go, but he should at least get an honorable discharge. Like that to me is one of the biggest ethical concerns. And it's kind of getting bounced around in courts and the messaging law. So I don't know. I don't know it, but I will say what I'm getting happy about is that people are starting to question certain narratives. And I don't think the managerial class, the elites, have fully understood what's happening. They're still hiding behind a lot of their processes and old systems without realizing that the information sharing in places like this is empowering and giving people where like, I can watch the Afghanistan evacuation and I immediately knew that they had made a long list of mistakes immediately, right? And a lot of like people that have been around a lot longer said, well, let's wait. Let's let history determine this. In 20 years, we'll go back and we'll quarterback this. And it's like, no, the general's in the seat right now. Like, this is obviously wrong. I can see it. You can see it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my take on it.
Stuart, your book, when it comes out, will it have to go before a government review process before you can publish it?
It's a good question.
Are you under any kind of?
No, that's the thing. I'm like the one guy they have I don't even have VA benefits right now. Like they can't take anything. They can't do anything to me.
So you're not under any kind of gag order still with
No, I'm out. Stu Scheller. So
questions?
it'd be interesting to see.
We have a couple over here.
Thank you for your service. The way that you exited the military, does that prevent you for running for any kind of political office? And if not, then would you consider running and fixing the problem that you pointed out earlier?
Yeah, good question. No, my court martial was a special court martial. It wasn't a general. So if it was general, it would have been a felony. And even then, I mean, you can, how it works is you ask for permission, essentially. But it's like a misdemeanor-ish. And so it doesn't affect me at all in terms of running for politics. I got approached by the RNCC to run out in North Carolina for this 22 cycle. And I had to tell them no. You know, my life was so upside down that I couldn't do it. So I did develop a coalition of candidates that are running across America. In fact, Josh Mandel running for the Senate here in Ohio is a guy I'm endorsing. And that's kind of how I see myself affecting this 22 cycle. So we got about 7 Senate candidates and probably 25 congressional candidates. And what my bumper sticker for that organization is, we want leaders, not politicians. And I understand there are representatives, not our leaders. Like I got that, but going back to that problem I described with Congress, no one having the courage. Like we just need some people that are willing to say some unpopular things. And even the Republican and Democratic parties, I mean, I'm a pretty central guy, I'm a conservative, but it's like, I don't even necessarily know what the Republican and Democratic parties stand for anymore in a lot of ways. It's like they almost switch their views depending on who's in power. And I could go back and historically tell you what they stood for, but then it just seems to evolve a lot. And so as a guy that's just like on the outside, it's confusing. And I don't like party politics. So that's a long way of me saying, I don't know if I can be a politician, because I want to just tell the truth. And I feel like that's what people want, but at the same time, they also want you to be affiliated with the party. And so I'm like, that's like my internal struggle, right? So if I was to align with someone, it would probably be the Republican Party. I go to a lot of the Republican events. Almost everyone in my coalition is Republican. But at the same time, like I have views that are independent. And so I don't know if I can play nice in the party. That's where I'm at. I know, me neither, me neither.
Yes, you were talking about accountability for the generals. And I don't know exactly how the whole process took place, but I do know that in the 1930s, they did arrange to retire a lot of the older generals because they didn't want to repeat a World War I, where you had a mass slaughter of people, of soldiers who were being led by 80-year-old generals.
Yep.
Now, I don't know whether such a process could be done today or not, but would that be a means of holding people accountable?
Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, I've never actually gotten that question, but Eisenhower was hand selected and hand grown through that process that you described. So if we would have stuck to the model that we have today, or that was before World War II, Eisenhower would not have been leading that. And so there were some very smart people that sought him out and homegrown him up very quickly and pushed all the old timers out of the way. And thank God they did that, right? There's also another historical example that it's actually in my book that no one teaches or understands anymore. There was a General Singlaub that was a World War II vet, and he was in the commander of Korea when Carter was the president. A lot of parallels between Carter and Biden. Carter said, I'm going to pull all the troops out of Korea. It's the exact same scenario as Afghanistan. And Singlaub went into Carter and said, hey, you do this, you're going to get a lot of people killed. It's a bad idea. Carter said, all right, I heard you out, but I'm still going to do it. And then Singlaub went public and resigned, like exactly what I was advocating for General McKenzie to do. And Carter didn't pull the troops out of Korea. And he saved lives. But we don't teach that anymore. It's not in a single military university. And so it's almost like selective memory, selective learning, and it's a problem.
Stuart, we have a question online in the back.
We have a couple online questions. First, someone's asking, do you at any time feel that military leadership were going to contrive a charge that would put you in jail for years? Or did you feel confident the entire time that you would be freed and released from the military as you ultimately were?
I was prepared to go to jail. I mean, I read the manual for court martials. Everything I did was thought out. I was trying to solicit a response, a disproportionate response to bring attention to the situation. Right. So I thought about everything that I did. And if you go back and look at the timing, this is all in my book, the day I made the post to violate the gag order to get myself into jail was 4 days before the congressional testimony, in anticipating that they would send me to jail, which would bring attention to the general's congressional testimony. And that worked. They had to ask General McKenzie, they had to ask Lloyd Austin about why I was in jail, and they weren't being held accountable. And in that, before I made that post though, I read the manual for court martial, and it clearly stated that I had to be a flight risk or lesser forms of restraint had to be used. And I knew they didn't have that, but I knew based on their behavior and everything that they had been doing that they would most likely disproportionately react. The military had never been in a situation like this. There was a lieutenant colonel that wasn't listening, that wasn't responding to the offers, and was just continuing to make statements. And so they did, and they wrote on the paperwork that I was a flight risk. Blatant lie. I mean, blatant lie. And they put me in jail. And at that point, I had a decision. I had a decision where I could have stayed in jail for 6 months and gone to general court martial, where then if I was guilty at general court martial, it would have been a felony. I was 5 charges, so just one of those was a bad deal. Or I could have got out after 9 days by accepting a deal where I pled guilty to everything at special and misdemeanor, and then I go about my life. And I thought about it. I mean, this was not an easy decision but I came back to like, what am I trying to do? I wasn't trying to beat the military generals. I was trying to preserve a message. I was trying to bring a situation. And I thought, if I accept accountability for my reasons, I felt deep down that I had broken some rules. And so if I sit here and say that I'm guilty and I accept accountability, and that's exactly what I'm asking of my senior leaders, it gives me more ground. So I chose not to fight it. I chose to plead guilty, take the special, and go about my life. And yeah, so that's the answer to that. You get a pension? I don't.
Second question.
Do you think that at some point there will be a trial to blame for the lack of accountability in Afghanistan?
No. No, I think the only way you change this right now is going forward. So you can't bring back what's lost. General McKenzie, he already done his change of command. He's retiring. So at this point, you change the system by voting and calling your representatives and demanding that they start using the DoD budget as a lever for control. I outline 13 points in the way forward in my book and how you can change the military culture. And so I stick by those, and I would refer that person asking that question to get the book and read those. But I don't, as far as Afghanistan evacuation, I think we're past that. The time was when I was speaking and everyone else chose not to speak.
And our last question, can you comment on other soldiers' feelings of how their role played out in Afghanistan?
can I comment on other people's feelings about Afghanistan? Is that what the question is?
Yeah.
No, I'm not gonna answer that. Sorry. I mean, I don't mean to be flippant, but I can't speak to other people's feelings. I can say there was a general sense of, I mean, everyone was angry. But the entire American people were angry because it doesn't take a military expert to see the failures that were taking place. And I guess I'll add to that. The other thing that bothered me, and the reason that I got so angry, is because the general officers, I mean, you can Google it. The Pentagon released a statement that said, go seek a therapist if you're having problems because you're probably struggling from PTSD. Like they were victimizing us. Like, yeah, I've been to combat, but you know, even if I'm dealing with stuff, don't treat me like a victim. I chose to go to combat. I wanted to go to combat. I'm stronger because of it. Why I'm upset is because you failed me as a senior leader. And now you're trying to tell me that I'm upset because I'm a victim? Like, no. And that's why, like, stuff like that was further angering me. We have such a suicide problem right now. And it, in my opinion, is a lot of victimization. Service members aren't victims. Like, I've gone and gotten treatment for some things, but I'm stronger because of it. And when we have senior leaders that continually tell people that they're victims, and when failures are happening, they need to go seek treatment, like, yes, there's part of that, but there's also part of maybe they need the senior leader to acknowledge some type of fault of what just happened. That might alleviate a lot of feelings of guilt and shame. So I started with no, I wasn't going to answer that, and then I came on strong.
Hey, Stuart,
yeah.
where was the jail at? And tell us about
Yeah.
it. Where did they, when they put you in jail, did they say, hey, rough this guy up a little bit, or how, you know, how was it?
Yeah, I took them all out. No. Yeah, it was a tough situation for everyone. So I showed up and the chief warrant officer met me at the front door and said, hey man, I'm sorry. Like, I don't agree with why you're here. I'm in charge of the jail and this is just business. And so we're going to put you in special quarters, which special quarters in the Camp Lejeune Brig is it's solitary confinement, but there's like a slot that like you can see some of the other solitary confinement. So it's not solitary confinement because you can still hear voices of other people. But I was like even special in special quarters because all the special quarters guys got to go like outside together. And they didn't even want me to go outside with those guys. So I went outside by myself and saw the guys in general quarters, but food was good. Got some time to myself. I mean, it wasn't all bad.
Question right here.
Yeah, two questions for you, if I could, please. My name's David. One, did you have access after you posted your video? Did you have access to your congressman, whether in North Carolina or here? And did you find any assistance from them?
No, Greg Murphy was unhelpful. So one of the candidates that I'm supporting is challenging Greg Murphy in North Carolina. But Greg Murphy, I mean, I could go on about Greg Murphy for a while, but he actively, I mean, he got on TV and said, there's a lot more to Stuart Scheller and you haven't heard the other half of this. And then found out I was a pretty good dude. There was no other half to this. I sent him a congruent and asked for his help. And he came back and said, you made decisions, you're in jail. I was like, all right, got it. But what happened is, like classic politician, when I got out and now I'm living in his district and I was, you know, there's praise, lionized, I was a threat. Calling me, trying to befriend me, doing all these things for me. It was slimy. And I saw right through it. And so, no, I did not get much help from him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question for you, as far as your, well, let me ask a follow-up to what about any Cincinnati-based politicians, since we're sitting in the middle?
Josh Mandel got on an interview and the broadcaster baited him and basically said, you know, Stu Scheller, some good stuff, but there's a lot of negative things you could say. A lot of people disagree with it. And he snapped and completely supported me on that interview. And I watched that. And at that time, and it's easy in hindsight now to say like, yeah, that's easy, but you got to keep in mind, like everyone at the time was talking about how wrong it was, like everyone. And so it was very brave of him to do that. So I immediately reached out and was like, I'm loyal to you forever, because it took a lot of courage to do that. And you got my support.
We've got a question right here.
Thank you. And my name is John. I was a junior military officer back before you. And I disagree with a lot of you. I don't think you should be a politician. My question will pertain to that. I look at that World War II map and I think about battlefield commissions. And I think about, we have 20 years of experience of troops in the enlisted and the officer ranks that have experiences that don't require them to go through the zones and the promotions. I'm sure you've thought at least about making a think tank, and I'm using a general term, of how do we fundamentally start working on change, whether it's bringing in some civilians
Yeah.
at certain levels, whether it's battlefield commissions, and I'm using really general terms that everyone I think would understand. I'm curious if you've thought about that or if you've been approached to do that. I think it's a more effective way to get your message out. So if you can comment on that, please.
Yeah, I think think tanks become as incestuous as some of the other government programs. I'm not a big fan of PhDs because they develop this entitlement, and they say the same things over and over. And I can sit in my apartment and read and get more out of it. And there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of think tanks. I read a lot of the Center for Strategic Studies think tanks. So I'm not saying that I don't read what they write, but I watch in rooms as they offer opinions that sometimes lack the experience that's required just because they have an academic degree. And they almost convince themselves. I read a book about why smart people are wrong so often. It's because they get so educated, they can convince themselves through a very intelligent argument why this color is blue. And I could sit here and just continue to tell you that this color is blue, and I could be very intelligent in telling you why it's blue. But you're like sitting here with no education, you're saying, that's green. What are you talking about, man? Like the Afghanistan evacuation, like you failed. Like, what are you talking about? I think podcasting right now has taken off because the media is so polarized and people are seeking out podcasts. A lot of people have approached me about podcasts. The truth is, brother, I just don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So I'm considering all options. So I appreciate it though.
We have a question right here.
How have you been able to make sure when your book comes out that the facts aren't going to be challenged? I mean, have you been able to provide references
nope,
and
No, I'm sure the historical examples are pretty. I mean, I don't think the historical examples are going to be challenged because I didn't go into like the question, did you examine all the battles? I kept a pretty personal story. I think all of I called out one of my friends and what he said about me in the investigation. That's factual. As long as I say the truth, that you can get upset about it. Of all my charges, you know what I was never charged with? False official statement. And think about that. After all that content I put out, and they were trying to stick me with everything they could, why didn't they charge me with false official statement? So my opinion is, as long as I just keep telling the truth, I don't care if it pisses you off. Because at the end of the day, I mean, right now, these big systems, going back to, we all have access to information. We're all maybe smarter than those people with those PhDs. We're all educated. We all can form opinions. They probably need to start reforming their systems. And I think the only way they survive these great hierarchical organizations is through truth, in my opinion, because the more they try to spin a narrative where we can see through it, it marginalizes the credibility of the entire institution. So that's a long-winded answer of no, I didn't fact check it with anyone.
We've got a question right here.
Colonel, even during the Vietnam era, even the enlisted ranks were commenting on, if the politicians would only let us win, we could do that. Some of the other wars that you mentioned, would we have had the capabilities of actually winning them if the politicians had let us?
Yeah, I think it's more complicated than that. I mean, Abraham Lincoln fired like 5 generals, right? So if Abraham Lincoln had stayed out of it as a politician, would the North have won? I don't know. And I think a lot of times when senior or junior enlisted say that, it has to do with morality things. And that one's the tougher one. Like I put in the book that I think there's a military theory called just war theory, and I think it's fundamentally wrong. I liken it to my teachers in the education system as a young child always told me violence wasn't the answer. That's not true. My military PhDs always told me America has to fight a morality war and have the moral upper hand to achieve victory. That's not true. The Taliban wasn't morally superior, but they won. So we maybe as a nation state need to come to a consensus. Do we want to be the moral nation or do we want to win the war? Maybe they can coexist, but maybe they don't. And so there's a deeper conversation there, and that's really what a junior enlisted is getting at. I in Iraq used to get shot at in mosques all the time. And I couldn't go in the mosque because it might offend the Muslim people. The Muslim enemy used to dress as females, and I couldn't stop the females, even though I knew that was a dude, that was an enemy, because if I was wrong, I would get fired because I don't want to offend the females as a man talking to a woman, right? Like, so there's two examples of like, those are small examples, but like those add up.
Question in the back.
I have two questions for you. Had you planned on retiring at 20 years or were you going to stay?
I was competitive to 06, so if I wanted, I left, I hadn't made the decision yet. So after a year of command, they offer you TLS, so the war college. So I would have most likely been selected to that. And then at that point, that would have been my decision point. If I turned it down, that meant I was retiring at 20. If I took it, that meant I was going probably till 25, 30. And so I left myself the opportunity. I think I probably would have gotten out at 20, but that's my whole career. My whole career was I'm gonna get out after the next one. And then I just kept staying. So I can't say with any certainty because I didn't get there yet.
My second question is a little off topic. Tell us about your farm in North Carolina.
Yeah, you told me to ask that. So in my second video that scared a lot of people, I was on an abandoned school bus in Eastern North Carolina. And what a lot of people don't realize is I bought 50 acres in Eastern North Carolina as a captain. And I partnered with a veteran nonprofit that does suicide prevention for service members. It's called A Hero. You can check it out at ahero.org. And that's what we do. We don't allow drinking out there. And we bring them out. I've got some four-wheelers. And so we didn't have enough money for like a house. So I bought a rundown school bus that had just enough power to get onto the farm. And we ripped the seats out and refurbished it and gave them a place to sit. And so when we were talking about some of the things that they've been through. And so when I made one of my videos, I needed a place to make it, and I made it in the school bus. And everyone was like, why are you in a school bus? But there was a deeper purpose, and it was used for a good cause.
Stuart, if you had any advice to give to our leaders about what to do about Ukraine, what would you say?
My biggest fear with Ukraine is that we get involved in a no-fly zone, or this thing spills over into Romania or Latvia, and it triggers Article 5. I don't think, I think the Afghanistan evacuation led and emboldened Putin, but we can't, ultimately Putin's making his own decisions, right? No matter what the political landscape is, like we messed up the Afghanistan evacuation and Putin is exploiting it. We can't control that. So I mean, right now, my advice would be don't get involved in a no-fly zone. If it spills over into one of those other NATO countries, do not trigger Article 5 immediately. Like if a company commander gets lost and makes his way into one of the other countries, like let's not start World War III over that. Let's take a deep breath. Let's evaluate the situation. And that would be my advice.
Got time for a couple more questions right here. Anybody else?
My name is Ted. Hey, look, I grew up as a little kid watching John Wayne movies and guys like you, real men in the military.
Thanks, Ted.
And right now, I see a lot of socialization of the military. They want to mimic society. Like if I'm going to be a prize fighter, I don't necessarily want to have a housewife in there fighting. I get the prize fighter type things. You want to touch a little bit on that, but do we really want to socialize the military to put our women on the front lines, to have the transgenders I heard are just joining the military so they get a sex operation? Is that what the military has become, just to try to generalize, socialize the military to look like Yale University or look like some cosmic?
I understand the question. I got it. Yeah, so there's a chapter in my book completely dedicated to this, because if you've served in the military for the last 20 years, you just can't avoid the topic. And so I developed an analogy, and it's overly simplistic, but I'll offer it to you, and it'll explain my point of view. So what the problem is, everyone wants equality, but equality is different than equal opportunity, and the two things are conflated, especially in the military. And so let's just use basketball as a simple example. Got a basketball hoop right here. NBA, WNBA, that's equal opportunity. Equality would be everyone tries out for the team and the best player makes it. So imagine a world where there's two teams playing and the losing team dies. That's the stakes of the game. That's the stakes of this war game. And you're playing basketball one team has to be equally represented with females, males, races, sexualities. One team gets to pick the best players. And you have to bet your kid's life on that game. Which team are you going to pick? Right? So, like, everyone wants equality. There was a time where I mean, I could give you so many examples, and a lot of them in my book, but this is such a hard topic because people are so hypersensitive about it. And there's so many little niches to it. And like, I will have like a open conversation about it. But yes, there has been a swing kind of the other way. Like, my number one point was the military's focus has to be on warfighting. It has to be on the best team. And I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's a Martian. I don't care what your sexuality is. I don't care what that is. I just want whatever that standard is for the best team, that not to be infiltrated with anything other than warfighting and the best team.
Let's thank our great guests for coming tonight. What a great talk. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think it's safe to say you've got a lot of people here who want to be first in line when that book comes out. When is it? September 9th. We'll make sure to order some and get some, hopefully get some autographed copies. Yeah, and for those of you who are online who didn't hear that, we'll put a link to that on our website. It'll be up there tomorrow morning, as will a complete video copy of tonight's class. It's so empowering to hear from somebody who stood up for what he believed. I think almost everybody out here, when they were on the ground watching that when it happened, it was so hard to watch. And I'm just personally appreciative for what you did. Let's thank Stuart one more time. Everybody have a great night. Go out tonight, do great things, and empower you. Thank you. Good night. Make sure to get your handouts on the Great Reset.